Yeah. Forrest, do you have the nuclear thought experiment?
Now, you did not say we should do a nuclear strike on anybody, right? But you said we should, correct me where I'm wrong, we should consider doing a nuclear strike, for a first nuclear strike, under certain circumstances. I find that to be incredibly dangerous talk.
Okay, but it is a dangerous fact of the world that we have nuclear arms, right? We have nuclear arms because we have already considered doing a nuclear strike under certain circumstances. That is what the Cold War was about. Yes, so this is the world that we're in right now. If we could uninvent these weapons, that would be great, right? But we have a nuclear doctrine, and it developed entirely in a Cold War context, where we were faced with the Soviet Union that was, for all of the flaws and all the ideological quirks, this was not a death cult and did not have the basis of being a death cult. These were rational actors, and their hopes and fears and aspirations were constrained by terrestrial concerns. These were not people who could say, we love death more than you infidels love life, right? And again, this is just 2 paragraphs in the End of Faith, right? This is not me talking ad nauseum about nuclear policy. But in just a very kind of game theoretic way, I asked us to consider how a belief in martyrdom, a belief in paradise, just unties this convention of mutually assured destruction as a deterrence. The Cold War was possible because neither side wanted to really play a game of chicken. When you're playing a game of chicken with someone who wants to get to paradise, you're screwed. You're going to lose this game of chicken, right? So, and the moment you accept, and again, many people don't accept this for reasons I cannot fathom, but the moment you accept that certain people really do believe in paradise, really do want to die and to get there, right? Or they're hoping to be martyred. This is that death today would not be a bad thing for them. And then you imagine us failing to keep the big bombs and the long-range missiles out of their hands. You imagine a regime that is just like ISIS, but they've got ICBMs. We have to find some way to avoid that. And the Muslim world in particular has to find some way to avoid that. The Pakistanis that already have bombs, right? They don't have the missile technology, but they have the bombs. They're a coup away from delivering these bombs into the hands of the Pakistani Taliban. We have to find some way to avoid that.
But Sam, the reason why I think your idea is dangerous is because it makes the likelihood of nuclear strikes far more likely. Because if you say to the Iranians, we think you're part of a death cult and we don't trust you, even though the Iranians, like them or dislike them, have been very rational actors throughout, okay? They are enemies in a lot of ways, as the Soviets were, right? But the Soviets were also rational actors, even though we didn't agree with them and they were our enemies. If you say to the Iranians, we're so afraid of your death cult or whatever we think your intentions are, that we might do a first strike on you, you make it far more likely for them to do a first strike on us.
Well, or I mean that again, that's an interesting conversation from a game theoretic point of view. It could be that you make it far more likely for them just not to build the bombs in the first place. You say
that has not been how things have developed.
No, but
either in this context or any context.
You just have to play it out. So listen, you have a belief system. We're taking you seriously. I mean, you're the people who are waiting for the Mahdi, and you're hoping. You realize that this world is just an antechamber for the world to come, and you want to get there.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second here. You don't really think the Iranians think that?
No, I think I agree with you that there are people in Iran who think that, but they have not been in control. So yes, no, Iran is distinct. I'm not saying that Iran is Al Qaeda or the Taliban. I mean, all of these groups are subtly different. But what I was asking in those 2 paragraphs in the End of Faith was for us to consider the possibility, the horrible possibility that must be avoided at all costs, that a regime that is the psychological equivalent of the 19 hijackers, people who really are willing to hit a wall at 400 miles an hour, gets long-range nuclear weapons.
The second huge problem of that line of thinking, Sam, which is that if you start going down that road of assumptions, well, then we would do the unthinkable. So I'm afraid that what people are, they're going to take you seriously, right? You're doing it as a hypothetical, and you're doing it as a game theory, etc. But neocons can easily take that and who desperately want to attack Iran, right? And other people and your fans and people that are reading you, that are watching, etc., can think, well, yeah, these guys, they all want to commit suicide, they all want to go to heaven, and we got to hit them. We got to hit them.
I'm not saying we're in that situation, right? So so again, we have to, and you have to follow every word in this argument. There's a difference between long-range nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons, right? Long range means you can launch a missile from wherever you are and hit Paris and London and New York and Los Angeles, right? Even North Korea doesn't have that technology now. Pakistan does not have that technology. So it's not simply a matter of having nuclear weapons. But yes, if we can't have a Cold War with a regime, and I'm not saying Iran is this regime, but I'm saying there's a possible regime, a regime of true jihadists who prove with their actions that they really believe what they say they believe.
Yeah. Actually, Forrest, do we have the quote from the End of Faith? Because I'm pretty sure he's just lying about what he actually said there. Based at least on my memory of the passage, I think that there are qualifiers and there are things that that he put in that version. Okay, there we go. There is little possibility.
It's a two-part graphic, by the way. So this is one paragraph, and there's another paragraph.
Right, but just right here it says there's little possibility of our having a Cold War with an Islamist regime armed with long-range nuclear weapons. And Cold War requires the party to be mutually deterred by the threat of death, etc. Right, so he's not actually saying anything that would exclude Iran today, right, from being it. He's not saying like, oh, maybe if like Al Qaeda took state power and they had this, all he's saying is an Islamist regime. Like that is a much broader category than something that was literally just like 19 hijackers.
What will we do? What will we do if an Islamist regime, which grows dewy-eyed at the mere mention of paradise, ever acquires long-range nuclear weaponry? That's the basic question that he asks, that he's breaking down in the second. Yeah.
In such a situation, the only thing likely to ensure survival may be a nuclear first strike of our own. Needless to say, this would be an unthinkable crime, blah, blah, blah. It's the only course of action available to us, given what Islamists believe. How would such an unconscionable act of self-defense be perceived by the rest of the Muslim world? Sorry, could show it one more time?
Yeah, sorry.
It would likely be seen as the first incursion of a genocidal crusade. The horrible irony is that seeing it could make it so. The very perception could plunge us into a state of hot war with any Muslim state that had the capacity to pose a nuclear threat of its own. So, like, what he's saying here is if a Islamic fundamentalist regime of, which is not a hypothetical category, that's like an actual category, had long-range nuclear weapons, then, gosh, I guess we'll have no choice except to commit genocide. Which there are a lot of things that you can say about this, but one of them that I just have to say for the sake of the honor of academic philosophy as a profession is that this has absolutely nothing to do with what the combination of words thought experiment means.
What's bizarre about this is it seems to me that the exact same logic that drives this conclusion should also bring you to the same conclusion about any Christian country. Because even though you don't get the built-in stuff about jihad and martyrdom, you still have, Christians believe that when they die, they go to heaven forever. And so it follows logically, if you're willing to be, ridiculously reductive about the ways in which religion influences behavior, if you really believe that after death, you're going to go to heaven and be with Jesus forever, then of course the normal game theory considerations are right out the window. These people need to be wiped out if they have access to a nuclear weapon. But of course he doesn't.
Especially because it doesn't matter if those Christians are in power. The points, and you say, the people who are actually running the United States aren't very religious. The United States is just one coup away. right? From having having these people in power. So as long as there's anybody in your society who's extremely religious, this should this should apply. This should apply to you. And again,
he touches on it. He actually touches on that example in the thing with Jank later on, and says, "Oh, having everything kind of line up for the evangelicals, and then having a far right evangelical president would probably be the most terrifying thing, control of nuclear weapons." But then he basically goes on to be like, "Oh, well, there's some intrinsic things about Islam that make it so it's different in this case than the other case," because of course that's what he says.
No, really, it seems like the conclusion of this is the only people you should trust with long-range nuclear weaponry are atheists, which means that the ideal situation of the Cold War would be that if the Soviet Union had nukes and we hadn't.
Right.
but clearly, like, you can't trust him because he's the one saying, "Oh, we should nuclear strike people first," as an atheist. You know what I mean? He's the one I wouldn't want with nuclear weapons.
He meditates, so it's illegal.
Yeah, he meditates. The self-evident truths about who needs to be nuked are apparent to him because he meditates.
This assumes that all people in Islamic movements, their main objective is to achieve martyrdom. That is not true. If you look at what motivates ISIS fighters, they wanted the rape and plunder, right? If you look, this huge sexual slavery was a big draw for these people. It wasn't necessarily martyrdom. Martyrdom was a justification given for, was a way to sort of give morale to the troops in the same way that, soldiers are your life for your fellow soldier is a good. Islamists talk about this metaphor of martyrdom. And if you look at the way martyrdom does it, it's not, not everybody in an Islamic movement is martyring them. During the Iran-Iraq war, they were getting young, impressionable kids to go martyr themselves because, older people would be like, I don't know if I want to go blow myself up. So they would indoctrinate these poor little, teenagers to go kill themselves when they're at an impressionable age. But the notion that what motivates Islamists is martyrdom is really misleading. What motivates them is the creation of a very specific social and political order, which they're willing to lay down their life for, just as many other people who do not have a notion of an afterlife are willing to lay down their lives for particular things. I don't agree with what they're laying down their lives for. I think Islamism is dangerous and bad. But to look at it some kind of, this is just a rehash of the nonsense they said about the Chinese in the 60s and the Japanese in the 40s, that they were these people are irrational. We have to drop a nuke on the Japanese, otherwise they don't want to surrender because they'll stab us to death with sticks.
Which is an interesting question too, right? So would it have been impossible? If Imperial Japan had long-range nuclear weaponry, would that have justified genocide to stop it? Because after all, there were kamikaze pilots, who were going to martyr themselves, for the cause. And it just seems like in that case, would obviously say yes, Imperial Japan was able to recruit people who were willing to self-consciously martyr themselves, throw away their lives, for the emperor. But nobody would think that meant that all Japanese people in the 1940s, or the actual decision makers, Tojo, people in the Japanese government, didn't fear death and couldn't be deterred in any way. And in general, every cause has martyrs. Who doesn't have martyrs? That's the yeah.
It's a nice point to revisit this issue about how he treats religion as this one-faceted phenomena. He never comes out. Sam Harris doesn't have any invectives against Shintoism. He doesn't say that we need to wipe out Shintoism, even though Shintoism in Japan pre-World War II and during World War II was just an absolutely insane worldview that led to all sorts of awful acts. There's a direct line from it to the kamikaze pilots. But now Shintoism in Japan leads to festivals, nice holidays. It's almost as if the way religion manifests itself is going to depend in deep ways on material conditions.
Yeah, or to really cut to the heart of the Sam Harris point, Buddhism, right? I mean, there's that book Zen at War, that I think Zizek brought up with Peterson about the way that Zen Buddhism was mobilized in in support of imperial Japanese militarism, at one point, historically. And yeah, I mean, it's like, again, though, God knows, like, Christianity has historically celebrated like martyrs, in lots of different contexts, people who are willing to, be fed to the lions, because they wouldn't renounce Christ, and really venerated, the people who were willing to do that. In fact, willing to do that in part because they believed that they were going to get a reward in heaven. But this isn't even like unique to religion. I mean, like, the British Labour Party, historically, the song they sang at their party conferences, the red flag, says, the one of the lyrics is the red, red with the blood of our martyred dead, like talking about, people who are Chartists and trade unionists and stuff like that, who died for the cause, in various, massacres historically, like that, like this is the least distinctive thing about radical Islam as ideologies go, that people are willing to martyr themselves for it.
Ultimately, Sam Harris asks the wrong question, right? Like, he asked the wrong question about the Islamic world. He asked the question, why is Islam so violent? Rather than asking the more intelligent question, is like, if we accept that there is a particularly pernicious version of political Islam alive in the Middle East, the question should be, why have those particular interpretations of Islam gain currency at this particular moment in history? Historicizing. Sam Harris seems to be incapable of asking a question that is not entirely abstract and ahistorical, and that's the fundamental. Reason. He looks at the particular conditions that exist in the Middle East. He takes everything on face value, right, and then he proceeds to say, what is it about this ideas that makes these people so violent, rather than asking about why have particular versions of Islam and not, which he concedes exists, right? He concedes that, oh yeah, jihad could, why have those not taken, why have those interpretations of Islam not taken hold, and these more radical and violent manifestations have taken hold? So he's fundamentally starting from a wrong premise to discuss these issues in the first place. And he just wants to, do his new atheist thing. I guess, like, wailing on Christianity was, like, not so cool because everybody does it. So, like, why not wail on Islam? Well, because it's just an extension of the same nonsense, right? It's like a branding exercise where, like, all these jerks, like, they all started off, like, making fun of right-wing evangelicals in the 90s. Then they became hysterical about Islam, and now they've created SJWism as, like, some kind of new religion, because there's no God in SJW, so they have to pretend like it's a religion because it's just like it's the same, like, root of, like, trying to be, like, contrarian and, like, anti-PC, and then ends up just making, like, really dumb takes, and it's really frustrating that these people get taken seriously. But I guess that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Not after today, though.
Yeah, not after today.
I'm assuming we're going to end his career with this podcast.
I would assume I guess doesn't technically count as a form of martyrdom, but I would assume that he's going to commit ritual suicide after the episode because he's been proven so wrong. So before we move on to the stuff about the moral landscape and his art, either Ryan or Mark, to one of you, just because, like, I feel like this should not be neglected. One of you want to explain why this is not what's normally meant by thought experiment?
Wait, is this not what thought experiments normally are? Just saying,
like, oh, this is something we might have to do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, you prescribe. He's doing, like, half thought experiments. Like, he's prescribing real world policies. Like we say, this is a bait and switch. Like, he pretends like he's doing a thought experiment when he gets pushed on the horrific shit that he's actually advocating. So yeah, maybe we have to nuke all the Muslims. Maybe we have to torture people, and then
When you
yeah,
say maybe, that makes it a thought experiment.
yeah, that's
Yeah, when you're saying this is something that might actually have to happen,
yeah.
then you're not doing a thought experiment. You're describing you're describing what you think might happen.
Yeah.
Like a thought experiment is a hypothetical situation that's designed to test our intuitions about something. So like you have, two competing principles, and maybe you have a thought experiment to show how these principles could come into conflict, which might be supposed to tell you something about which one is more important, right? That's a thought experiment. Like that's not, this is just speculation, and preemptive apologism, for what you think, speculatively, we might have to do, that it's like, oh, this would be a real shame if we had to commit genocide, but get ready for it. We might.
Okay, so most thought experiments are not actually suggesting things. So like Schrodinger was not suggesting that we put a cat in a box with a poison vial and a Geiger counter.